Welcome to the studio with Kristoff Malejczuk. And we are back after 2 weeks. The first 3 episodes dropped on back-to-back Mondays. But I took last Monday off because it was a statutory holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Now, I don't like to work on statutory holidays, but also I was skiing, so no episode was recorded. I think consistency is a great way for me to continually improve. So would it have been better if I didn't take last Monday off? Yes. Is it all right that I did? Yes. Is every episode better than the last? Yes. Is this one going to be the best? I hope so. I have dedication to this podcast such that I performed voice warm-ups this morning. Now, the voice warm-ups were actually not intentional. They weren't related to the podcast, but it worked out really nicely. Every day, I wake up, I meditate, and I take a cold shower. I've been taking these cold showers for about 2 months now. I just get in, turn the water to cold, get in there for 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5. Feels great. Normally, I wear my watch in the shower. That's how I have my gauge of time. Today, I was not wearing my watch, so I set the timer on my phone for 4 minutes. I guess recently, though, I changed my timer's ringtone, the alarm sound that goes off when it's completed. So I wasn't expecting the sound that actually did sound after the 4 minutes were up. I turned off the shower, and then I found the beat to be really funky. So I started freestyling to the sound of the alarm. I was freestyling for multiple minutes, probably 4 or 5 minutes. At least the length of my shower was the length of my freestyle. It is the slow rise sound that's just one of the defaults, the built-ins on Apple devices. Check it out. How funky is that? So I was captured by the beat, and I just spit a freestyle over it. This is the studio, undisputable, irrefutable. Take a seat and pop a pill or two, or maybe don't, 'cause life is beautiful. I got a thing or two that I think are true to say to you. That wasn't the freestyle that I spit coming out of the shower. Actually, this wasn't even a freestyle. I wrote this shortly before recording. But you get the gist. It's very similar to what actually occurred. Actually, what occurred in real life was probably even more fantastic. That's just a snippet, a preview, a sneak peek. So that was my vocal warm-up. So now I'm raring, I'm ready to go, I'm in full form, I have good energy, I had a good sleep, I had wild dreams, and my voice is sounding good. Some of my workplace colleagues now listen to my podcast. Last week, I'm in a meeting with 3 other people. It's a serious meeting. We're trying to push technology forward. Right before the meeting starts, before we get into the thick of things, one of my colleagues says, "So Kristoff, how's your podcast going?" I wasn't even the one to bring it up. That's remarkable. I thought that I would be the one who would always be trying to bring up and publicize my podcast. But I'm not going to do that at work. So he did it for me, which was great. This got everyone's attention, and then after the meeting, everyone did listen to the podcast. We have a group chat. This employee who listened to it, well, first of all, he brought out some very good news. Despite currently living in San Diego, he was born in Africa, which is fantastic because if you listen to episode 3, which you should, I'm trying to get a bigger audience in Africa. I'm trying to be huge in Africa. So despite having effectively 0 ties to Africa now, he was born in Ethiopia. But his next comment in the group chat with my other colleagues Conclusion of podcast. Kristoff loves Boulder because he doesn't have to see black people anymore. That's ridiculous. That is a mischaracterization. That is offensive. That is insulting. Are you kidding me? I even took Martin Luther King Jr. Day off. But on top of being a horrendously poor listener, this comment also screams a huge lack of generosity. And that made me think about a book that I recently finished. It's called Breaking Bread with the Dead, and it's by an American author who is currently living called Alan Jacobs. I think the book actually only came out in 2020. And I didn't enjoy the book too much. It wasn't bad. There were some good ideas in it. And it's definitely not in the vein of books that I normally read. In fact, I read it because it was recommended to me by one of my friends in San Francisco. And this friend of mine, I consider her to be probably the best read person I know. She's read German philosophy, Russian literature, modern American novels, British literature. She's read everything and she reads all the time. And she messaged me, she said, "This is the best book I've read in 2020. I had just finished reading The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which is a tremendous novel. And I thought, well, let me get this from my local library. I'll give it a read. I'll see what this is all about. The book is not that long. It's about 150 pages, and it's pretty much an essay divided into chapters where the thesis is talking about the importance of reading old books, of consuming old literature, of reading poems from the past, of consuming the works of those who came far before us. And the author is arguing that this will increase our personal density. It will make us more resistant to the storm of information that is coming at us every day, that is pushing us in every which way. This way we can actually stand our ground, have some perspective, and think for ourselves. Be people, not be swayed by the breeze of the time. I think for me, part of the issue is that I already agree with the thesis. All that I read pretty much are older books. I mean, I just finished Dostoevsky. I have Kafka on my bookshelf. I'm reading Nietzsche at the moment. I don't need to be convinced. Now, the author made hundreds of allusions to other authors. It was almost the whole book was citing other people, which partially detracted from it for me, although it made it extraordinarily clear that the author is tremendously well read. One of the points that the author brought up that I thought was good, was valid, was talking about how we should be generous to the figures and authors and artists of the past. Right now, we're in a time of huge cancel culture where we like to shut someone down, end their career if they do something that is contrary to our values. But not only is that happening to living figures, it's also done to people in the past, people who are dead. I mean, in 2020, there was this huge epidemic of statues getting torn down. And the author is saying, well, sure, you can judge them for holding viewpoints that you think are horrendous, horrific, primitive. But if you throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you don't acknowledge that they may have had other fantastic ideas which actually led to pushing civilization forward in a positive manner, who are you going to have to learn from? I mean, judging figures from the past by the morals of today, you're going to find probably zero people who are up to snuff with your standards and qualifications. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Sure, yes, acknowledge that people who came before us, maybe this person was racist, this person was sexist, but maybe they also had these revolutionary ideas in other fields that we can take and we can learn from. So effectively, we're harming ourselves by disregarding everything that these figures have done just because we don't approve of some of their actions. And he frames this in a certain part of the book through the lens of generosity. And I like that. So I say to my colleague, exhibit some more generosity. One person I find really interesting is Mike Tyson, for the way that he's managed to slip through the finely woven net of cancel culture. Right now, people are having their careers ended over sometimes baseless accusations, or at the very least, maybe a couple tweets and an article in the LA Times, and boom, your career is over. And sometimes maybe it should be. Some people probably do horrendous things, and it's great they're being exposed. But I think in a lot of cases, people are getting shut down very rapidly and not being given the benefit of the doubt. And also their good ideas, their good art is being thrown out with them as people. The elements that we could learn from them are now also gone. We are limiting the scope of what is acceptable to consume. There's not a differentiation being put in place between the art and the artist. And this can be harmful to us because art can be inspiring and moving and profound, even if it was created by a villain or by someone to whom you wouldn't want to look up. Now, Mike Tyson has somehow slipped through this web, this net of cancel culture, because he went to prison for rape in 1992. He was sentenced for 6 years. He only served 3 because he behaved very well in prison. But being sentenced by a court of law to rape charges is one of the highest offenses that you can commit, especially by today's society's standards, which I would agree with. But Mike Tyson now has a successful podcast. He has a Broadway one-man show, or I guess he used to, and he's planning on having another one in the future. He's invited to talks all the time. His quotes are in business places and workplaces. He's a source of inspiration for so many. And well, I really do think it's fantastic that his actions have been separated from his inspiration. I think Mike Tyson is an extraordinarily changed man. His largest focuses today are on love and kindness. He took DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is a drug, an extremely powerful psychedelic, and I think it radically changed who he is as a person. So he's extremely disconnected from the individual who he was in the past. And for me, I get a lot of inspiration out of Mike Tyson. I derive two-faceted inspiration from Mike Tyson. There's the Mike Tyson of old with his rawness and his intensity. I mean, his story is crazy. When he was 12 or 13 years old, he was discovered by Kristoff, one of the greatest boxing trainers in history. And Cuss took Mike Tyson under his wing. He actually even adopted Mike Tyson. And he trained Mike Tyson, he raised Mike Tyson, and he also manipulated Mike Tyson's mind. Kristoff would hypnotize Mike Tyson. And before fights, he would be hypnotizing him, and he would be telling Mike, you don't exist. The only thing that exists is the mission. And of course, the mission was to destroy the opponent. So Mike Tyson's own sense of self was radically altered and transformed by his mentor, Kristoff. And Cus D'Amato is such a powerful figure to Mike. Even today, Mike can hardly talk about Cus without crying. It's incredible. So Mike Tyson would be walking towards the ring. He'd be making the walk out from the dressing room to the ring to fight. And he would start walking and he'd be scared. He was scared because he realized losing is a possibility. But with every step he took closer to the ring, he felt more and more confident. And by the time he got to the ring, he thought he was a god. Mike Tyson's mind was in this undefeatable mindset. To him, he was untouchable, and he boxed like it. His opponents were afraid. Mike Tyson had a famous interview. He knocked out Lou Savarese, an American fighter, in 38 seconds in the first round. And he was giving his post-fight interview in the ring. And what he says, it grips me today. I derive a lot of... I'm fascinated by the mindset of Mike Tyson, and I derive from it certainly motivation and also potentially some inspiration as to how I can shape my mind and think about myself relative to conquests that I am embarking on. Mike Tyson says, and I quote, "I was gonna rip his heart out. I'm the best ever. I'm the most brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's ever been. There's no one who can stop me. Lennox is a conqueror? No. I'm Alexander. He's no Alexander. I'm the best ever. There's never been anybody as ruthless. I am Sonny Liston. I am Jack Dempsey. There's no one like I'm from their cloth. There's no one that can match me. My style is impetuous, my defense is impregnable, and I'm just ferocious. I want your heart. I want to eat his children. Praise be to Allah." Wow. Wow. I am amped up just reading that. Oh my gosh. He says Lennox is a conqueror. He's referring to the Canadian-British boxer Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis won a gold medal at the 1988 Olympics in Seoul for Canada in the super heavyweight division. He was talking about Lennox because people were talking about would they fight, and yes, they did fight later. Actually, Lennox beat Mike Tyson. This was getting near the end of Mike Tyson's career. But Mike Tyson in this interview before fighting Lennox, right after knocking out Lou Savarese in 38 seconds, says Lennox is a conqueror? No, I'm Alexander. He's no Alexander. When he says Alexander, he's referring to Alexander the Great. Mike Tyson studied the conquerors of the past. He studied Julius Caesar. He studies Genghis Khan. He studied Alexander the Great. I think Alexander the Great is a large figure of inspiration for Mike. Cus D'Amato made him study history. He got in the mindset of these greatest conquerors in the world. He recently fought Roy Jones Jr., his first fight in a long time, and it was for charity. And in the lead up to the fight, Mike Tyson said, "I am the greatest fighter since the conception of God." That was resonating in my mind for at least a week. I thought about that during every one of my workouts. Just that type of power and self-belief, it's so potent. He thinks he's the greatest fighter since the conception of God. That's hard to even imagine. He thinks he's greater than Alexander the Great. That's the Mike Tyson of old. The Mike Tyson of new is quite different. The Mike Tyson of new is all about love. I saw Mike Tyson give an interview at the New York Public Library. He had had a biography published. He wasn't the author of it. And he said that his whole life he had been striving to be great. He wanted to be the champion, the best boxer. But now he had a new goal. He was striving to be good, to be a good person. I think Mike Tyson is incredibly wise. He seems to understand a lot of Eastern philosophy, or at least project a lot of Eastern philosophy. I don't think he's studied much Eastern philosophy. I think he's actually come to a lot of these ideas through his consumption of psychedelics. Of course, psychedelics and meditation can be quite related, go hand in hand. Meditation, of course, being a basis of a lot of Eastern practices, a lot of Eastern philosophy. Mike Tyson has these wonderful ideas about love and the ego. And I'm so glad that he has platforms where he's able to put out his ideas and that I can consume them, because in the past he was just this killer, this source of conquering inspiration, and now he is almost a philosopher. So I'm grateful that somehow society has been generous to Mike Tyson, understanding that not everything he's done has maybe been exemplary, but that there's a lot we can learn from this figure. I think it's important to acknowledge that people can change, especially when they show such tremendous evidence that they have changed. All you need to do is watch a video of Mike Tyson now versus when he was younger. The change is impossible to deny. Now, is he pretty much high all the time now? Yes. Does he have a very successful cannabis business? That's also true. It might not be fair to judge someone solely as the perpetrator of the worst act they've ever committed. People are multifaceted and can change over time. Now, are there people that we shouldn't forgive? I'm sure. Are there people that we can't learn from? I'm positive of that as well. Mike Tyson is not one of those people. I think that probably numerous people who are getting canceled are people that maybe we can also learn from, and people who can change. And that there are dangers to throwing out the art with the artist, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I encourage everyone to think about generosity, and if they're being as generous as they could be or should be. And I don't mean this just in terms of the context that I've been discussing, in terms of canceling public figures, but just in your interactions, how you're interpreting what someone says, if you're giving someone the benefit of the doubt. For me, generosity is one of my highest held virtues. In university, I was fortunate enough to be a co-founder of a club where the collectively held highest value was generosity. This club was the Weed, Wine, and Cheese Club. And it consisted of me and three of my dear friends and colleagues, Eli, Gavin, and Graham. In our fourth year at the University of Waterloo, we are required to partake in a fourth-year design project where we identify a problem and develop a solution, drawing upon our knowledge that we've garnered or are supposed to have garnered over the previous 3 years of the program. Graham, Eli, and Gavin, the other co-founders and members of the club, were on the same team for the fourth-year design project. And their project was to develop a filter that would remove hydrogen cyanide from cannabis smoke without filtering out any of the THC being the psychoactive compound. So the three of them and I formed the WWC, the Weed, Wine, and Cheese Club. And we would have meetings every, 2 to 3 weeks. We would get together at one of our houses and we would partake in the three substances: the cannabis, the alcohol, the dairy. But the club had nothing to do with any of those things. Really, it was a conversation club based upon generosity. That's what it was. Because the primary activity that we would engage in was conversation. We never watched TV, never watched a movie. Sometimes we listened to music, but it was all about conversing and exploring ideas and connecting with each other. And it was a really beautiful thing. It's so interesting how we concealed the fact that we had a conversation and generosity club behind the banner of a weed, wine, and cheese club. It's amazing because my memories associated with these nights are so positive, yet very few examples of activities can come to mind. It was the experience, the presence that was tremendous. When we were at these meetings, these club meetings, we were so fully in the moment, which is an amazing place to be. I mean, that's where you want to be always, whenever you're doing anything. You want to be in the present. But we so rarely are. And I think that's what makes this club stand out. We were so drawn in and focused on the moment, on each other, on love, on sharing, on generosity, on being. And I guess our generosity was in bringing the various substances to the event: the weed, the wine, the cheese. We'd all bring some. We'd never ask what the price was. There was never an exchange of money. We'd pour each other the first glass. We'd cut each other the first slice of cheese. We'd give each other the first hit off the joint. And by the way, cannabis was entirely legal and we were all of the proper age. I would never form a club based on something illegal. I think my mom listens to this. Hi, Mom. Some of the other memorable activities that we would engage in would be dancing and fighting. And what's really interesting about both of those activities is that they are fundamentally forms of self-expression at their purest level. And I think we were probably engaging in those activities at their purest level, or close to. The fighting was certainly not out of anger. It was out of exploration. It was something that was foreign to us, something that was exhilarating, something that was raw, a really interesting sensation to engage in. Probably my finest memory with this club was Graham's birthday. It was in our final semester of university, and the American rap artist Yellow Wolf had just come out with his new album. I forget what album this was. This was in 2019, so whatever his early 2019 release was. Graham was a big fan of Yellow Wolf. I'm not a huge fan of the guy. I thought his album that has the wolf head on a cover was pretty good. Otherwise, I don't bump his stuff. I don't even listen to that album anymore, but it's not bad. The new Yellow Wolf album had come out and Graham wanted to listen to it. So we decided to splurge a bit. It was Graham's birthday. We bought what I believe was a $40 bottle of wine, maybe 50, I think 40 Canadian. It was from BC. I believe it was a Cabernet Sauvignon from BC. By far the most expensive bottle of wine that any of us had bought to that point, and certainly the most expensive that the club had ever experienced. And we made this wonderful charcuterie board. We had some cheese, some meat. And then we got in Graham's car. But before getting in his car, we had these glow-in-the-dark balloons that we put around the outside of the car. We got in the car and we turned on the album. Oh, I should mention also, there was no driving involved. The car was in Graham's driveway. We all took a bus to Graham's house. We took a bus home. The car was just a really interesting environment in which to experience the club, the night, the album. We have the album on. We have the weed, wine, and cheese. We have the conversing. The glow in the dark balloons on the outside of the car are moving in the wind. There's a 5-minute period in which I'm absolutely convinced I'm in outer space. It was amazing. We had the finest selection of cheese and meat. We had gone to an upscale store. We had this nice wine. I think we even had a higher grade of cannabis. I remember later on, I thought we had turned on the radio and we were hearing radio static. This was after the Yellow Wolf album had finished, and it was just static for minutes. So I said, hey guys, what's going on? I said, Kristoff, this is just Flume's new album. Flume had put out actually a very good new album. Shout out to Flume. The Weed, Wine, and Cheese Club came to an end with the end of university, but the values live on. And from time to time, we have virtual meetings. And hopefully, before long, we'll have an in-person reunion. It was amazing to be part of a community where the driving values were generosity and love and consideration, and where we were encouraged to explore ideas and partake in honest self-expression. If you want more of that in your life, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts. You can follow this podcast on Spotify. You can also rate and review it on Apple Podcasts and follow me on Instagram at Malejczuk. That's my last name, Malejczuk. Our growth is fantastic. Truly thank you for listening, and thank you also for telling your friends and family and colleagues. I would love if you could all tell your sister about this podcast. And if you don't have a sister, tell one of your friend's sisters. Thanks for listening. Until next time, this is The Studio with Kristoff Malejczuk.